or indeed our existential self-destruction. And so a really sensible question to ask first off the bat is, well, why? Why on earth is it possible for you to find somebody somewhere at every single point on that continuum? And I think there are two answers to that question, one of which is proximate, but one of which goes a bit deeper. So first, the proximate answer to that question. For that, I want to take you back to the 1970s. If you look at the history of artificial intelligence, what you'll find is that over the last 70 or 80 years, there have been times when it's gone incredibly well. Massive amounts of money have poured in to great excitement as seemingly major breakthroughs have been accomplished. Although nothing quite like what has happened over the last year or two, I have to tell you. But then at other periods, there has been a subsidence of optimism. The technology has appeared to get stuck. The money has flowed out. Those are called AI winters. And an AI winter struck the UK in the 1970s. The government commissioned a report by a guy called James Lighthill. But this is the 1970s. And these kinds of government reports, believe it or not, were debated on television. So I want to show you a really short clip. In this clip, you're going to hear two people speak. The first person is James Lighthill, the author of the report. And he is going to explain to you why he uses the phrase artificial intelligence in his government report. But then he's going to be interrupted by a guy called John McCarthy. And I want you to listen very carefully to what John McCarthy says, why John McCarthy says he uses the phrase artificial intelligence.
What are the arguments for not calling this computer science, as I did in my talk and in my report, and calling it artificial intelligence? Is because one wants to make some sort of analogy. One wants to bring in what one can gain by a study of how the brains of living creatures operate. This is the only possible reason for calling it artificial intelligence.
Excuse me. I invented the term artificial intelligence. I invented it because we had to do something when we were trying to get money for a summer study in 1956.
In case you didn't catch that, James Lighthill is saying, if we're going to use the term artificial intelligence, we need to use it as an analogy, a way of bridging the gap between the human and the artificial. And John McCarthy interrupts him and says, oh, it was me that invented the term artificial intelligence, and I did it to get money for a summer camp. So the proximate answer to why this stuff is called artificial intelligence is because it's a really useful marketing term. And we might be tempted to leave it at that and walk away. But I think we get to a deeper understanding of why the term artificial intelligence is as powerful as it is if we dig a little bit deeper. And if we realise that John McCarthy is a product of the 20th century, and the product of the 20th century is the product of an Enlightenment epoch, a period of time in which science and theology and philosophy have each been carved off into different realms of knowledge. And so one of the reasons artificial intelligence can mean almost anything to anybody is because these three realms of knowledge cannot even agree amongst themselves what artificial intelligence is, because they cannot agree what human intelligence or consciousness are, because they really can't agree what human being is. So, James Lighthill wants to talk about artificial intelligence as an analogy. Intelligence that is somehow somewhat human-like. But people like Yuval Noah Harari, they want to use the phrase artificial intelligence as a simile. There is no difference between you and me and AI, because the brain is just a computer. We are warm, wet computers. Harari does not believe in free will. Harari thinks you are a hackable machine. Let me introduce you to this guy, Charles Taylor. philosopher and sociologist, wrote a fantastic book, about 2008 I think, called A Secular Age. And what Taylor does so very, very helpfully is he uncovers that trajectory in human thinking, which explains both why these realms of knowledge get carved off separately, so that science becomes distinct from theology, becomes distinct from philosophy. But what Taylor does that is the most helpful of all, I think, is he talks about the cross pressures that remain. He talks about the fact that when you've carved these things off, those fundamental questions, whether you accept transcendence or not, those fundamental questions about human life and meaning and purpose, they don't disappear. They reside in a culture and a society as a set of competing cross pressures. And in that case, it becomes easier to understand why AI is the way to everything from better Excel to an existential crisis or deliverance. Because if you think we are just warm, wet computers, if you think we are just hackable machines, then it becomes much, much easier to map every single thing we know about ourselves onto these machines. But that's going to include the pressures we experience. And that's why AI can then become the way towards uploading your mind to spend eternity in the cloud or navigating the universe. It's a very contemporary form of technological Gnosticism. Or if not simply pure existence as digital mind, then pure existence as digital repose. The computers will take care of your every want as well as your every need. This is the route we're on. This is the path that artificial intelligence is taking us towards. Or for some, a kind of technological singularity. And if you go onto the internet, you'll find there are websites dedicated to predicting exactly when this supposedly universal principle, which is the union of technology and biology, is going to be consummated in some kind of great explosion, some kind of singularity. Some people will say very, very passionately that they think we're months to years away from this great hypostatic union. And then for others, artificial intelligence is the route to self-destruction. Either through our own hubris, because we're too stupid, or because of our own ignorance and incompetence, because we're just too selfish or greedy or whatever else. After which, what artificial intelligence becomes the way towards, well, that's entirely in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? So the AI Pharisees will tell you we have to push ahead at speed to win the race. And the AI Sadducees will tell you there is no artificial general intelligence, no artificial consciousness. I need to move on to the next question. But before I do, full disclosure. I read as much as I can about the tools and techniques that are at the heart of the kind of artificial intelligence that has people the very most excited at the moment, so-called generative AI, large language models, that kind of thing. These are all forms of machine learning. As far as I'm concerned, they're just statistical inference engines, and I see nothing in the current tools or techniques that are going to deliver anything like artificial consciousness. But I want to do a bit of theology with you. And I want to tell you that I'm struck by the fact that in the second chapter of Genesis, when God is forming humankind, God takes Adam and forms Adam, but then as a second and unique act, so far as I can see, in the creation narratives, God then breathes life into Adam's nostrils. And so what I would like to claim is that the kind of life that Jesus is talking about when he says, I, Jesus, am the way, the truth, and the life, that kind of life, Zoe, that is God's gift alone to give. But I'm not an AI Sadducee, because I don't feel I have the right to say that God could never do such a thing. The second thing I have to tell you is that Christians of greater intellect than me and greater fidelity to the Spirit of God than me will disagree with what I've just said. We are going to disagree with one another about very, very deep-seated theological tensions and questions like this. Therefore, we should really work on how we disagree while maintaining communion with each other and how we disagree well with each other. Because I don't know about you, but I think we could really do with some better examples than Twitter. What is AI the way towards? Depends who you ask, doesn't it? But what about the money? Well, the thing about the money is it always goes to whatever somebody sees as a pro about artificial intelligence, whether that particular pro is power or profit or control. Second, what is AI's relationship to truth? AI has multiple relationships to truth. First thing to understand is that buried in these great big repositories of data are insights that are beyond the capacities of any individual human being to trace out and notice and make connections. And the speed and capacity at which we can analyse and compute data allows those processes to reveal truths that are hidden in the data that would otherwise be beyond human comprehension. Here's a really positive example. I love this example. There are a bunch of towns in North America right now who have a problem. Their infrastructure is old and needs replacing. In particular, they have a lot of lead pipes in their urban water systems. But it's a bit arbitrary where the lead piping still is and where it's been replaced. And so a town like Flint, Michigan had a problem because the only way they could solve this conundrum was to send a big old digger down and arbitrarily pick a road and dig up the pavement in front of the house to have a look at the piping to see whether it needed replacing or not. And then a group of university students took all of the different piles of data that the town had, 97 of them in total. They put them all into this big box and they created an algorithm that would then begin to predict whether a particular house or a particular section of the town had lead piping or not. And their hit rate for discovering where the lead piping was improved from 20% to 97%. Huge amounts of time and money saved. Lives saved, because lead's not very good for us. Artificial intelligence is doing really interesting things in the realm of weather forecasting. It is improving forecasting in ways that is absolutely saving lives, both around heat waves, flood events, all kinds of things. So first of all, artificial intelligence can help us because it can uncover helpful truths that are hidden in the data. But secondly, unfortunately, artificial intelligence can also perpetuate undesirable truths that are also embedded in that data. Like, for example, the program that estimates whether you are the kind of prisoner who is most likely to reoffend when you're released from prison, and decides that, yes, you are the kind of prisoner who is most likely to reoffend when you're released from prison, because your skin colour is the same as the skin colour of most people who reoffend when they're released from prison. Oh, but that's the same skin colour as most of the people in the prison system. So artificial intelligence can further embed and further accentuate those kinds of profoundly damaging and unhelpful bias that are embedded in the data by virtue of the fact that this is how society has functioned. Like, for example, the job recruitment algorithm that decides that you are the most likely candidate to succeed in this job as a computer programmer. And the reason it knows you're the most likely candidate to succeed in this job as a computer programmer is because you happen to be white and male and college educated, like all the other successful hires over the last 10 years. These are called algorithmic biases. And the risk is that some of these will embed and perpetuate those biases that are structurally part of how we comprise society. And so rather than challenging and overturning those, we need to watch out that we don't simply automate those and massively increase the rate at which those kinds of biases can be operationalized. So AI's relationship to truth, it can uncover very helpful truths. It can embed and perpetuate very unhelpful truths. And of course, the third thing it can do, well, it can completely replace the truth. So you've already had a chuckle at the Pope in the Balenciaga jacket. But there's a much more sobering story here about a group of school children in a Spanish high school who were able to download an app, and the app would scrape the girls in their classes' pictures from their Facebook profiles, and then it would nudify them. There was an article in the paper yesterday that said these kinds of nudification apps have become a business worth $100 million a year. And I will spare you what I know about artificially generated CSAM. So if AI can helpfully uncover truths, if it can unhelpfully embed truths, and if it can helpfully and or unhelpfully completely replace the truth, how ought we then, as the church, to deal with AI? How should we respond? Carefully. Carefully because it may contain several things. The first thing to be aware of is that we have something, and every single one of us does. Every single one of us here and outside this church, every single one of us suffers from something called automation bias. It is an inbuilt tendency in us to think that it must be true because the computer said it. Here's another great story. It's about an experiment that was run at Georgia Tech. Really simple experiment. Build a robot, Firebot. Make it clear that its job is supposed to be to help people to evacuate a building in the case of a fire, and then here's the experiment. You invite students in for a mock interview, and you get Firebot to lead them to the room where the interview is, but it's deliberately programmed to go wrong. It goes down the wrong corridor, it opens the wrong door. They have now seen how Firebot is an unreliable witness. Stick them in the room, as if they're waiting for the interview, and then trigger a false fire alarm with the white smoke and the sounds and everything else, and trigger Firebot, and wait and see what happens. And in the experiment, every single participant chose to follow the robot, even though they had already seen it go wrong, and even though it was actually taking them away from the very, very clearly illuminated fire exit sign above their head. So we all need to be self-aware enough to know that we have an automation bias, and therefore that we ought to treat the content or the output of artificial intelligence with caution. Treat it with caution because it may contain nuts, like the Google search return that was actually based on a jokey Reddit post which said if you've got a problem with cheese sliding off your pizza in the oven, you should use crazy glue to stick it down. It may contain exaggeration, like the claim that AI will know you're pregnant before you do, that AI will know you better than you know yourself. It may contain manipulation. I suspect all of us are familiar now with Andrew Tate's name. Oh, and it may contain fraud. Like the finance worker who was genuinely sceptical, but was so persuaded in the end that he really was on an artificial video call with 3 colleagues he knew well from work that he was persuaded to transfer $25 million of the company's money. And then there are those other deceptions like the Martin Lewis deepfakes and the Elon Musk deepfakes. And again, I will move on to the third point, but I want to make 2 points about the I amness of artificial intelligence before I do that. There is no I at the heart of artificial intelligence. At least at the moment, there is no I. And so, Claude or Grok or ChatGPT, they have no experience of the world against which to compare what they predict the right answer is. They have no sense of their own self-existence and their own self-dependencies. None of them know that they depend on water to cool the servers, let alone that they depend on electricity, let alone that they depend on programmers, because there is no I at the heart of artificial intelligence. And so when we talk about a device which is deciding or choosing or actioning, we need to be very careful to decide for ourselves whether we're using those kinds of words metaphorically or whether we're using them univocally. AI has no idea how utterly rapacious its energy and water demands are. There's an AI growth zone, first one in the country, which is about to be granted for Cullen, just down the road, and it will require an astronomical amount of electricity, and it will require an astronomical amount of water. And the knock-on impacts to all of us as this thing begins to be built are going to be astronomical. But these machines, they have no idea about any of that. But also the crucial thing is they have no idea that there is an external world to the world of data they have been trained on. They can't do a sense check. They have no common sense because they have no experience of the world against which to judge their outputs, which is why they will very happily both suggest you glue cheese down on your pizza, or, as Meta did about 6 months ago, quite happily offer you a beautiful recipe to cook wild mushrooms, recommending a species of wild mushroom which has in it truly lethal amounts of arsenic. And so, theologically, there is this key and fundamental difference between the I amness of artificial intelligence and the I am, the embodiment, the incarnation of Jesus, who can identify with us fully, univocally, because he was and is fully human. This is a key distinction between artificial intelligence and a true theological meaning of what it is to be human. Which leads me on to the third question. What kind of life does AI enable? Well, as you know, it can really benefit a life, can't it? It's possible now to have a device which will simultaneously translate between at least the world's majority languages in a way that can bring strangers together in a very powerful and significant way. AI can tell us things in real time about the world and environment around us. It can absolutely increase our knowledge. AI helped me to find this church very straightforwardly, having never been here before. But it also did it in a way that subtly coordinated my trip with trips of all the cars around me, subtly shifting cars on and off motorways, on and off major A roads, in order to balance the flows and loads of traffic in real time so that more people get where they're trying to get. And that's why those estimates on your sat-nav are so phenomenally accurate. So within 5% for an hours and hours and hours journey, hugely impressive. flip side of that is the harms that AI can bring. I don't think you need me to go into the lengths of the things I have learned in the course of my work around online harms and the impacts of social media on a generation. The stuff that is being invented and the implications it has for people who are children and adolescent now are genuinely profound. And we should be mindful of these things because our task is to defend the widow and the orphan, the marginalised and the weak. I've already talked about the school children in Spain, but that's the tip of the iceberg. I take no pleasure in telling you. And as this technology ramps up and is deployed everywhere at pace, there is no sense of duty. There's no duty of care. There's no even provision like polluter pays. Companies constantly come up with what they call minimum viable product, and they push it out into the market. And the posh word is externalise. Basically, they let society and governments pick up the pieces. So I want to introduce you to one more person, if I may. If you look at the picture on the top left of the screen, second from left, you'll see a younger version of John McCarthy, who was in the video we saw earlier, the guy who invented the phrase artificial intelligence. But the guy all the way over on the right with the glasses and the very impressive moustache, it's a man called Joseph Weizenbaum. Joe Weizenbaum's really interesting, really interesting. He created what is regularly regarded as the world's first chatbot. Joe Weizenbaum was a psychotherapist, but really, really into computers, was working at MIT in the 1960s. So he too did an experiment. He came up with a chatbot based on something called Rogerian therapy. And in Rogerian therapy, well, it's very, very easily turned into a computer program because what you do is you get the human participant to type in a sentence. My boyfriend has been treating me terribly recently. And what you do is you analyse the sentence for the key words and you just turn the key words back into a question. How has your boyfriend been treating you regularly? So Joe Weizenbaum came up with, and this is the 1960s, so it's a very primitive piece of script, easily broken, easily spoofed, easily fooled. But he came up with this simulation, and again he began to experiment on his students and was beyond horrified at what he discovered. Because what Joe Weizenbaum discovered is that none of his students could avoid deeply, deeply imprinting with this computerized simulation of a person. And Joe Weizenbaum tells a story about the day that his secretary, who had seen him write the program and knew as much as anybody else in the world about how primitive and simple and inhuman it was, sat down at the computer terminal to have a chat with Eliza and turned around to Joe Weizenbaum and said, "Joe, would you leave us alone, please? We'd like some privacy." Joseph Weizenbaum wrote this paper on the impact of computer on society. And I love this paper. I make myself read it at least once a year because this is one of the most prophetic pieces of writing I've ever come across in my life. The paper was written in 1972. But what Joseph Weizenbaum says in 1972 is, it is the indirect impacts of the computer on society that will be the most profound. And then he says, it must be up to society to choose which impacts it wants and welcomes and which impacts it rejects. And therefore, just because we can create a machine that is able to do something does not mean we ought to use that machine to do that thing. You're exhausted, but I'm at the end. If you take away just one thing from my talk this afternoon, I would really encourage you to take away those insights I've just given you from Joe Weizenbaum. the questions of choice and power are at the heart of how we as a church respond to artificial intelligence. How we develop and deploy artificial intelligence is crucial because the technology is capable of framing the question for us, but also therefore of profoundly narrowing the questions that we as a society even have any capacity to consider. So here, for example, is something I have heard countless times over the last 5 or 6 years as I've been in Rome. It is a claim which is so common it is now taken as self-evident. Artificial intelligence is calling into question what it means to be human. But having turned a saying of Jesus into a practical interrogation of AI, let me take a practical claim about AI into a theological interrogation. Is artificial intelligence calling into question what it means to be made in the image of God? I'm under no illusions. These are very deep questions. This is stuff that we, the church, ministers, we need to be wrestling with. We need to be thinking through. And then we need to be able to help others, parishioners, and those struggling with these questions to think through for themselves. And the real battle here is the remaking of the image of human being. And whether it is right that we are remade in the image of AI, or whether actually we maintain our status as human beings who are made in the image of God. I'll leave it there.
We have time for some questions. I have a question to start with. It's not really a question, but I think I missed when what I might call a normal computer program turned into AI. So take the sat-nav, for example. There's been sat-navs for ages, but they've not... Well, so when you start using Google Maps, then it does what you said, which is alter your route accordingly, whereas in the olden days it never used to. So I guess that's a change to AI.
So when I started in Roll 6 years ago, the term AI was actually rarer than it is today, and those who had some kind of technological awareness or expertise would occasionally use the term, but every time they used it, they would roll their eyes. And typically people, at least in the technical circles I was in, would talk about AI with air quotes, and then they would talk about the specific tool or technique they were referring to. There are lots of different tools and techniques, but my sense is the horse has bolted there. And everybody now just wraps everything up under this very, very flexible rubric called AI. Yeah. And so one of the ways through this, I think, if you're in a conversation with somebody, is to ask them what they understand the term to mean. And perhaps at that point, for both of you, or at least one of you, to go away and find out a little bit more about the actual technique that is in play. So there are two approaches to artificial intelligence, one of which is called good old-fashioned AI, and it's based on a little bit of neuroscience, but it's also based more, I think, on a philosophy of language. So you can attach this old-fashioned approach to people like Noam Chomsky, who had a very, very sophisticated theory of language. And that kind of artificial intelligence is called neurosymbolic. And then we have this new kind, which is based on so-called neural networks, and ways of mimicking, supposedly, how the brain is wired and how the brain functions, and using clever statistical forms of inference on data to produce a certain kind of output. So one of the questions is, well, what kind of artificial intelligence are we talking about? And in what way is it artificial? But in what way is it actually intelligent? Because AI is a very powerful marketing term. There are adverts on TV, you can see for yourself, where someone with a supposedly straight face is calling an air freshener artificially intelligent. What?
Okay.
I have a certain vested interest insofar as my grandson, having got a master's at Cranfield in applied AI.
So is mine. My grandson too.
And he's got a job now with a firm in Preston developing non-drivers vehicles. And do I applaud that or do I deplore it? But the other thing that you referred to was the enormous amount of energy and water that these systems, as they grow exponentially virtually, can the planet sustain that without, as it were, leading to its own existence?
Thank you. These are really, really big and important questions. And so I'm a little bit nervous about seeming to give a trite or simplistic answer. Because honestly, I think as a culture and a society, we're going to have to do some wrestling with both of those questions. So I'll put the driverless cars to one side for a minute and talk about the energy and the water issues. Let me just tell you how the real world works, if I may. This government is wholesale invested in rebooting economic growth. This government is convinced that the surefire way to get the most amount of growth the most quickly is to put all the eggs in the AI basket. And so this government is not particularly interested in the practical and pragmatic challenges around energy or water, except how can it solve them quickly enough and short-term enough to get these AI growth zones and all these new data centres online. I think that the question of energy use and electricity is the easier to solve because we have some technological fixes which we could at least deploy in principle. So we could increase the amount of offshore wind, we could increase the amount of solar. So there are ways of increasing the amount of electricity in the system that's available. And I am persuaded that technological advances will probably make data and compute cheaper and more efficient. Although there's a thing called Jevons paradox. The experience of coal in this country was the more coal you pull out of the ground, the more people burn, because the price goes down, so people just burn more of it. How much does Jevons paradox apply to compute and data centres is, I think, a difficult question to answer. For me, the bigger challenge is the water one, because I don't see a technological fix to the amount of water this country is capable of accessing. But I've read enough climate science to know that we already are short of water, that all the projections are that our water shortages are going to get worse, and our climate's going to become increasingly unstable. But none of this is going to stop the government from putting spades in the ground in Culham before the end of this year, according to the Secretary of State on a podcast last week. So actually, I think part of our response, to be blunt, to be honest with you, part of our response has to be to think about what resistance consists of. This maps onto the Joseph Weizenbaum stuff. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. As a society, as a culture, we should all get to decide. We shouldn't have decisions imposed on us. But the real world is such that we are going to have to resist. And I'll leave it as an open question what that might consist of. But now I'll pick up your question about driverless cars. One of the things you won't know about me, apart from Ian, is that I used to be an airline pilot. Spent 15 years of my life flying for Thomas Cook, flew the Boeing 757 and the Airbus. So one of the things I bring to my current role is a lived experience of the interface between the human being and the machine. I can tell you stories about those days when the automation bailed me out, augmented me, and made my life easier and better. But I can also tell you slightly more hair-raising stories about those days when exactly the same automation completely discombobulated me and left me scratching my head going, what's it doing now? So I come to the question of driverless cars, and the main thing I say to myself is, hang on a minute, the first autopilot was created in the 1930s. The first auto land was actually a British invention in 1973. And yet we still have pilots in aeroplanes. Why is that? Well, let me tell you why that is. Because the problem with flying is the edge cases. It's those things which happen so rarely and intermittently that the only way of tackling the problem safely and successfully is to have a human at the heart of the decision-making process. Do I think that driverless cars are feasible? Absolutely. It's easy to do test cases, it's easy to do proof of concept. Do I think that we will live in a country where the vast majority of vehicles on the open road, as they are today, are autonomous vehicles in my lifetime? Absolutely not. I don't think so. I think there are a set of issues around autonomous vehicles which look like they're quite easy to solve in principle, and so it always looks like the horizon is about 18 months away, but every time they get closer, the horizon gets further away. And I would be interested to know whether your son or grandson agrees with me, but I need to see rather more before I'm convinced that driverless cars on open, ordinary roads, surrounded by other people in old-fashioned cars, is going to be a common sight. And the reason it's worth talking about autonomous vehicles is because you will find a lot of people at the moment talking about AI agents. An AI agent is this supposedly autonomous program which you can just cede parts of your life to. I want to go and see Oasis in concert. So you ask your agent to get you tickets for the Oasis concert. There is so much money being poured into AI agents at the moment. There are huge companies, multinationals, spending tens, hundreds of millions trying to develop and deploy AI agents at the moment. My view is that AI agents are at least as difficult as autonomous vehicles, and therefore something that looks conceptually straightforward is going to prove almost impossible to implement pragmatically because of what are called edge cases, those awkward, oh, that's out of distribution, I've not seen that situation before. There are just going to be so many of those. And I'm sorry if these are too technical answers, but this is the level we need to start engaging at this stuff with. And we need ongoing conversations. Because, and I'm going to keep going back to Joseph Weizenbaum, it is the indirect impacts that are the most significant. So I think one of the risks here is that actually we find there are fewer and fewer roads we can drive our cars on because they've been reserved for autonomous vehicles that can do a certain amount but can't do everything. And actually we're the losers in that.
Okay. You've given us so much to think about. Thank you very much. Some of it's, most of it, went over my head. But it's very interesting. Thank you so much. And we will discuss it, I'm sure, in the future. Thank you.
Happy to give notes. Happy to give a copy of the slides. It's not that it's complicated. It's that there's a lot to take in because this technology is everywhere. And it's the indirect consequences that turn out to be the most important. Please don't say I didn't understand any of that, I'm done with this. Please say I didn't understand enough of that, I need to think a little bit more deeply about this. And my door is open. If you want a conversation, if you want me to clarify, I'm happy to come back and do so.
Thank you so much. It's very gracious of you. Thank you.
Can I just make a comment? I think it's not a question. I think on some of the stuff that you've been saying. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, just a comment. It was interesting, the whole idea around how artificial intelligence takes a lot of the stuff. So, for example, the racism, and I was thinking about the impact on violence against women. Betty, can you come here, please? I don't know why you're wandering on. And that, and obviously you cited that incident with those boys in Spain. And I just wanted to sort of say there's something to be said about the difference between AI and ourselves, is that we can think and reflect on what's going on in society and actually make change and actually think about change, whereas it feels like AI just keeps digging in and going, no, that's the same, let's keep it the same, let's just keep it the same, whereas we're above that to keep thinking, actually, we need to be looking at the impact that this is having, the negative impact, what can we do to bring change? And that's what the Gospels are always telling us as well. I don't know, that was just something that was in my mind.
No, it's absolutely, couldn't agree more. And so just to extend that thought a little bit, one of the difficulties in doing that is transparency. You have to know what the algorithm is doing in order to decide whether you want it to keep on doing more of that or not. And these very, very big companies, they are as opaque as they can get away with. And at the moment, the government is minded to give more and more power away to them. So again, unfortunately, part of the call to resistance, I think, is to name these things, as uncomfortable as it is, and to try and hold to account. We need to say to the Metas and the Googles and the Amazons and the not Twitter, but X. We need to say to the Elon Musks of this world, that's completely unacceptable.
You're not listening though, are you?
No. But the other thing is I'm an optimist. Okay? The reason I'm an optimist is because I'm a Christian. I think God's going to have the last laugh here. I think God is perfectly capable of raising up a church who can speak light and truth. And I'm deeply embedded in philosophy and theology enough to believe that truth is ontological, to believe that light will always quench and overcome darkness. So I am an optimist, but I think it's time for the church to wake up and not be embarrassed about engaging in this stuff, and not to be fooled by a narrative that says, oh, it's too complicated for you, dear, leave it to the experts. Because that's a deception in itself. They're just statistical inference engines.
Thank you.
Another question there, I think.
So to the illiterate, how do you challenge the opaqueness?
So I think we're trying to challenge that opaqueness by holding government's fire to the feet. That's increasingly difficult, if I'm honest. We're trying to hold companies' feet to the fire through research. That's getting a little bit harder. I wonder whether there's going to be a season of whistleblowing, and actually some of the frustration is going to be divinely generated internally within these companies, such that it's going to be, for a period of time, I think, whistleblowers who bring the most significant revelations to us. Therefore, my personal opinion, and that's all it is that we should start to think about putting in place some kind of mechanism that makes that easier and safer for them. We need to think about safe abode and how pragmatically and practically we make it easier for people to whistleblow, and we make it safer for them to do so. And I think there's more work to be done in that area. The other thing is, so the reason so many of you have a Facebook account is because everybody you know has a Facebook account, and it's the only way you can talk to your grandchildren. Signal, WhatsApp, whatever the app is. These are called network effects, and they're deliberately made to lock us in so that it becomes harder and harder for us to leave. And I wonder whether part of that personal action, personal act of resistance, and indeed part of the corporate act of resistance, is to say, no, I've had enough, I'm off. You may or may not know that the founder of Spotify has just invested something like 700 million in an AI drone development company. And now my 23 and 25-year-old kids are saying, Dad, we need to get off Spotify. These are examples of what I think I mean when I talk about resistance. And I wonder whether the Spirit of God actually is beginning to call different people in the church into different kinds of resistance, and that then those different kinds of resistance will start personally but will become cooperative and corporate. Because if we don't do these things, well, I don't think God is going to give us very much credit come the day if we don't fight back. Do you know, I feel bad standing in front of you saying these things out loud, because I sense the weight of what I'm saying. But this is a really, really crucial period in history. There is a lot that is in play at the moment. And all of this stuff, I'm just overwhelmed to say, it is linked to a set of ideologies around particular presidents and prime ministers and particular billionaires. And there is a particularly false and perverted form of Christianity that is not very far away from that. We can't afford to say this is somebody else's battle. We just can't afford to say that. But if we do, I still believe that God's going to have the last laugh. So if we say that, I just think God's going to find somebody else. And I'm just unburdened by the weight of what I'm saying to you. I feel like crying. But I trust God.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I'm so glad that we did invite you to come and talk, because you've certainly portrayed how important it is, and I'm sure there'll be further discussions at some point about what we've heard and what we can do. Well, I think certainly I, and I'm sure there are others here that feel still. Well, I know you said your door's always open, so I think we'll be coming back to you, because
That'd be lovely.
we're going to just scratch the surface, I guess, today.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, if you don't mind, I did also just have a word with Serena to see if she would just take the next few minutes try and tell us a little bit about her new role as UKME. Is it chaplain?
No, UKME Dean.
Dean.
Yeah, Dean of the UKME chapter. Oh, do you want, just
Excuse me. So the UKME chapter, so UKME stands for United Kingdom Minority Ethnic. So that's what it stands for. And basically the chapter was created out of, I always forget the gentleman's name who died. I can't remember his name. Anyway, there was an incident about 5 years ago, and Bishop Stephen was really, really conscious that not enough was being done to support different ethnic groups within the diocese, clergy and laity, to support them getting, just to support them, because I think it can maybe go unnoticed that clergy of colour and different ethnicities and different cultures, it is harder. There is racism that happens, and so it's harder for us to get into positions, into roles, or even just to get into the doors of a church. the amounts of stories that I've heard from my brothers and sisters who said, you know, when their parents came over here for different jobs and just weren't welcomed in. And so you think about, it made me really think about all those hundreds and thousands of Christians who could be part of our community today and that are not because they were rejected and they were told to go up to the other church up the road, that's where your people go. And so Bishop Stephen, you know, really wanted to, you know, like the Church of England has, you know, been trying this has been going on for about 30 years, I think there was a real push to think about this and think about the impact that's been going on in the Church of England of not supporting people from different ethnicities. So the chapter was created 5 years ago. Janet was our dean, and she stood down recently, and I was asked if I could take on that role. Sorry, Bertie's, because we clapped, he thinks it's the end, that's why he's getting a bit frustrated, he wants to go. So that's why I'm now the new UKME Dean, and basically it's a chapter, you know, we're a group, there's about 30 in our WhatsApp group. We meet every couple of months, and we mostly meet online because obviously you can imagine this diocese is huge. So it's very, very hard for us to meet in person, so we mostly meet online. And we support each other, we have an opportunity of prayer, and you know, we'll hear from other people and support us. We'll be thinking about things like Black History Month, we'll be thinking, are we doing anything, you know, we want to kind of not just support each other, but actually be a resource for the diocese. So if you're thinking, actually I'd quite like to do a Black History Month, something, or maybe your school wants to do some more to do with Black History Month or any of those kind of things, or just thinking about any cultures, you know, it doesn't have to just be Black history, but any culture, you know, we want to be a resource and support our diocese. So that's kind of what the chapter's about, what we do, and I've got a 3-year term, so I'll be supporting the chapter for the next 3 years, and no more. So that's okay.
Yeah, that's lovely, thank you. Thanks. Shall we stand just to pray before we go? Heavenly Father, thank you that we've been able to gather today, and thank you for such thought-provoking presentation that we've heard. And thank you for this wonderful church. Thank you that we've been allowed to use it and the equipment that they have here. We pray that you would be with each one of us as we leave and travel home. In Jesus' name, amen.
Hear all that again, you probably find it on YouTube if you look for Deddington Church Live.
They're taking